My first appointment with the psychiatrist, Dr. Anthony Page, eventually came around. I wasn't looking forward to it. I didn't like talking about the state I was in, but Kath had obviously briefed him about me. He held out his hand for the blue journal I'd been keeping, and there was a long and uncomfortable silence as he read every word, letting it all sink in. After he'd finished, he closed the book with a thoughtful nod and handed it back to me. Then, he began to ask me a series of questions. Did I feel suicidal? How long had this all been going on? What form did my nightmares take? Was I sleeping properly? Did I think about the Falklands a lot? He was calm and thoughtful, carefully writing down my answers as I spoke. After 20 minutes or so, he sat back and clasped his fingers together. "I'm confident you are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder," he said. He went on to explain that this was a condition discovered in 1980 in the USA during a study on Vietnam veterans which had examined the high levels of psychiatric problems and mental illness many of them had experienced after that war. Some excellent treatments had been developed, which meant that it could be cured completely or certainly reduced in intensity. This was amazing news. Dr. Page knew what my problems were, and he knew how to cure them. I felt a weight lift off me. He told me I would be working with a community psychiatric nurse called Frank Quegin, who had a particular interest in PTSD. Then he gave me another appointment to see him. We shook hands, and I left. As I was considered to be at high risk of suicide, I continued seeing Kath until my treatment with Frank started. Among the medications I was prescribed was another antidepressant drug called clomipramine. I'd gone from being someone who rarely took so much as an aspirin to a walking medicine cabinet. The clomipramine was designed to help me sleep, and it did reduce the night terrors, but the side effects were awful. I felt sick all the time and constantly knackered. I slept for most of the time, and when I was awake I was like a zombie. I became even more withdrawn, retreating into my shell for hours on end, not speaking or interacting with anyone. Keeping my eyes open and focused was a chore. One day I accidentally drove my car into a fence, and it says a lot that no one was at all surprised. I didn't have the energy to smash the house up or become aggressive towards Julie, but her quality of life was nil, as was mine. I suppose it was fitting that the day I had to start my treatment with Frank, I'd been sleeping on the beach. I was dressed normally by my eccentric standards, a month-old pair of combat pants covered in mud and fragments of shale. It was only when I made my way back home in the morning, looking like Rambo's wild-eyed feral cousin, that Julie reminded me I had an appointment. I didn't have time to change or even wash. I think Frank was mildly concerned that I might have an AK-47 stuck under my camouflage jacket. I was actually as surprised at his appearance. He was a young man in his late 20s, with shoulder-length, curly hair, a complete contrast to Dr. Page. I had expected him to focus on the war straight away, but he never mentioned it. First, he had me fill out a Beck Depression Inventory, a questionnaire developed by a US psychiatrist to assess one's mental state. I scored 49 out of 63, which indicated severe depression. Next, he asked me to make a verbal contract with him that I would not harm myself. For the next 8 months, I worked with Frank on my problems. I attended anger management courses, and my depression decreased until I got it down to 7/63 on the Beck scale. A vast improvement, and one which put me in line with most of the population. Most startling of all, Frank cured my flashbacks, using a method developed in Israel to help soldiers suffering from mental problems related to combat stress. When he outlined it to me, I was skeptical, to say the least. It seemed too simple. He wanted me to imagine the flashback in my mind and then to think of a positive statement. For instance, I would think of fighter bomber jets flying overhead and say, "I am proud to have done my duty." Meanwhile, Frank would move his fingers slowly from left to right with my eyes following it as I repeated my statement. To my amazement, it only took about half a dozen of these exercises to stop the flashbacks. I've not had one since. Even Frank admitted he didn't know exactly how it worked, but who cares? It works. It's essential to build up a relationship with someone like Frank, and I believe I did that. It seemed to me that he was putting so much effort into my problems that I had to give him something back in return. So, in the early days, when he asked me how I was doing, I'd say I was okay, when really, though I was improving, I was still in a dreadful state. Luckily, Julie would tell him the truth, forcing me to be honest, and we made progress. Unfortunately, the night terrors continued, as they do to this day. Still, I went from a man who slept on the beach, thought constantly of suicide, and wouldn't admit his problems to anyone other than his wife, to someone who eventually felt able to tell the world. During one of our sessions, Frank gave me the address of an ex-services charity that had homes around the country to help former soldiers and others with their problems. I talked it through with Julie, and she decided to give them a call. They ended up sending a flight lieutenant down to assess me. He suggested I spend some time at a residential place in Scotland. He sold it to me by making it sound like Butlins for ex-quaddies. I'd be there for a fortnight with the chance of a return visit later. I was a little apprehensive. I still found it hard discussing my situation with people I didn't know, but at least there would be other ex-quaddies there, guys like me to whom I could relate. I could see that chatting to men who were going through the same things could be a great benefit. The only problem was the funding. I had no war pension and no job, so I had to apply to social services for financial assistance. The social services sent a lady round to assess me, and after a couple of hours of the Spanish Inquisition, she closed her folder and said I had no chance. She was right. I got a letter a week or so later saying that Cumbria Social Services had overspent their budget for the year. This was a massive blow, having got over the mental hurdle of agreeing to go north in the first place. I'd started looking forward to it, hoping it might be good for me. I was angry and down about it, and it reminded me of Rudyard Kipling's famous lines, for it's Tommy this, and Tommy that, and chuck him out, the brute, but it's savior of his country. When the guns begin to shoot, and it's Tommy this, and Tommy that, and anything you please. But Tommy ain't a bloomin' fool. You bet that Tommy sees. As it turned out, my war pension wasn't far off, so that funded the trip instead. Sadly, it turned out to be a waste of money. If you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe. Read A.A. McNally and the whole story in his book Still Watching Men Burn Fighting the PTSD War.